In the heart of the frozen forest, where the snow falls mercilessly and the wind howls like a grim warning, a touching scene unfolds. A small wolf cub, weak and injured, struggles to take its last steps. Lost, alone and on the verge of collapse, his eyes reflected a despair that few would survive to tell about. Each howl that escaped his throat was a desperate call for help, an echo in the white expanse that seemed to have no end. But what happened next was something no one would have ever expected. If you've heard of unbelievable rescue stories, get ready, because this one will touch your heart. The little wolf's survival instinct was running out. He trembled, his paws faltered, and his body gave in to the relentless cold. Everything indicated that that would be his last night. But fate, always unpredictable, had other plans. In the wild, where the weakest rarely get a second chance, an unexpected act of compassion changed everything. On the white and misty horizon, a colossal shadow appeared. A lone giant, a predator feared by many, walked silently through the forest. Snow piled up on his thick fur, and his heavy breathing created clouds of vapor in the frigid air. It was a bear, and what he did at that moment surprised everyone. Imagine the scene. A helpless, injured, and vulnerable cub about to succumb to the cruel winter. Suddenly, he feels the presence of something immense next to him. The bear approaches, its huge paw leaving deep marks in the snow. The silence of the forest was broken by the sound of his breathing and the soft crunch of the snow beneath his weight. He stopped, watching the little wolf curiously. None of them moved. Two different worlds, two destinies that should never have crossed, were now face to face. The cub, too weak to run away, just stared at the giant before him. His body was shaking, not just from the cold, but from fear. After all, bears are powerful predators, known for their brutal strength and relentless dominance over the wild. But something was different. The bear didn't growl, didn't attack. Instead, he tilted his head, as if trying to understand this fragile little creature in front of him. What happened at that moment was a true wildlife miracle. Against all expectations, against all the rules of nature, that bear did something no one could ever imagine. The bear remained there, motionless, staring at the cub as if trying to make a decision. His dark eyes reflected the white immensity around him, but they also seemed to demonstrate something rare in wild nature: empathy. Then, unexpectedly, he stepped forward. The puppy, scared and without the strength to react, just watched. What would that giant do? Would it be the end or a new beginning? But before continuing this incredible story, I want to know your opinion. Do you believe that animals also feel compassion for each other? Have you ever heard of stories like this in nature? Comment below, because your participation is essential. Also, if this story is already giving you goosebumps, don't forget to leave a like. This helps us bring more exciting stories like this and shows YouTube that this type of content deserves to reach more people. And if you're not yet part of our community, click the subscribe button and activate the bell. Here we tell incredible stories of rescues and connections between humans and animals, moments that defy the rules of nature and prove that in the wild heart, there is still room for gestures of pure compassion. Now let's get back to the story, because what this bear did next was simply unbelievable. The night was relentless. The wind cut like invisible blades, carrying with it small ice crystals that danced through the air before accumulating over the endless white landscape. The Alaskan wilderness, known for its wild and awe-inspiring beauty, now turned into a cruel battleground for those unprepared to face the rigors of winter. Between snow-covered trees and shadows lengthened by the pale light of the moon, a small wolf cub fought against its own fragility. His steps were unsteady, his paws sank into the soft snow, and his body shivered with cold and exhaustion. He was alone, separated from his pack, exposed to an environment where every second counted. The survival instinct still pulsed within him, but his strength was fading. The pain in his injured paw prevented him from running, and each step became a superhuman effort. The howl that escaped his throat was weak, barely a whisper in the face of the storm raging around him. His call echoed across the white expanse, but no one seemed to hear it. In that bleak scenario, time was his worst enemy. The temperature had already dropped to a frightening 20°C, and the wind chill could be even worse. Without shelter, without protection, the cub was condemned to a cruel fate. He wouldn't last long there. His eyes, now half closed from exhaustion, and the ice that accumulated in his fur, reflected the struggle between hope and despair. He wanted to find his family. He wanted the comforting warmth of his pack, but everything around him said that wouldn't happen. Every second that passed was a blow against his chances of survival. His breathing, once quickened by fear, now came out in small, irregular puffs, creating clouds of steam in the freezing air. His paws weakened, and for a moment he stopped. His muscles no longer obeyed as they used to, and his body seemed heavier every moment. He tried to stay upright, but the exhaustion was relentless. Then, as if all his strength had been drained at once, he collapsed into the snow. There, lying vulnerable, his gaze fixed on the icy horizon, as if searching for one last sign of hope. But all he saw was the silent, white expanse of the forest. The cold was beginning to numb his body, making it harder to distinguish pain from fatigue. His eyes slowly closed, and his small body surrendered to the ice that enveloped him. Would that be the end of it? But then, in the darkness, something changed. A heavy, rhythmic sound broke the silence of the forest. The sound of firm footsteps crunching through thick snow. Something moved between the trees, something big. The cub tried to open its eyes, but its vision was blurred. He only felt the presence approaching, the sound of heavy breathing contrasting with the dead silence around him. His instinct warned him that something was very close. Suddenly, a colossal shadow formed beside him. Something immense hovered over him, its heat contrasting with the biting cold of the night. It was a bear, and not just any bear. A giant grizzly bear with thick fur and deep eyes was now watching him curiously. The puppy smelled the animal's strong scent and tried to move, but its body no longer obeyed. All he could do was wait. Nature always follows its own rules. Predators and prey, strong and weak, life and death. That's how things worked. And at that moment, everything indicated that that puppy's fate was already sealed. The bear could simply attack him, crush him with a single blow of his powerful paw, or ignore him and continue on his way, letting the snow complete what he had already started. But surprisingly, none of that happened. The bear remained motionless, his gaze fixed on the little wolf that lay in the snow. He tilted his head as if trying to understand what he saw in front of him. The helpless cub just watched with half-closed eyes. There was no longer fear in him, only resignation. His body no longer reacted, and his mind was giving in to the cold. Then something unbelievable happened. Instead of moving away, the bear slowly bent down, bringing its nose closer to the cub. He sniffed him cautiously, smelling his cold skin, noticing his shallow breathing. He moved around the cub as if assessing his situation, and then, without any logical explanation, he made a decision that defied all the laws of the jungle. But before we continue with this impressive moment, I want to know, have you seen anything like this before? Do you believe that animals can feel compassion for each other? Comment below, because your participation makes all the difference. Also, if this story is already hooking you, don't forget to leave a like. This helps our channel grow and bring more exciting stories like this. And if you're not already part of our community, sign up now and activate the bell so you don't miss any of our videos. Here, we tell incredible stories of rescues, resilience, and inexplicable connections between humans and animals. You won't want to miss what comes next, because what this bear did was something no one ever expected. The rising sun painted the sky with orange tones, but the cold still dominated the forest. The wind whispered through the snow-covered branches, and the wildlife was slowly awakening, as if that dawn held a promise of survival for some and an uncertain fate for others. In the middle of the white expanse, the little wolf cub remained motionless, partially covered by a thin layer of snow. His breathing was shallow, almost imperceptible. His body had given up fighting the cruel cold of the night. Everything seemed lost. But he was no longer alone. A few meters away, A colossal creature was slowly moving. Its thick fur was stained with ice, and its giant paws sank into the snow with each firm step. It was a brown bear, a supreme predator of that region, a giant that could decide the fate of the little wolf in a matter of seconds. He advanced, his black eyes fixed on the small, defenseless creature that lay on the ground. Their keen sense of smell picked up the scent of a wounded, weak animal, and in the icy jungle that usually meant one thing: easy prey. The cub remained motionless, unaware of the approaching danger. His small body trembled, even unconscious, an instinctive response to the internal struggle to survive. The bear stopped beside him, its nostrils flaring as it sniffed the fragile creature. What would happen now? Grizzly bears are unpredictable predators. Although they are not known for hunting wolves, they are opportunistic and do not waste an easy meal. Any alone and weakened animal in the forest can become a victim, and that cub was defenseless. Any other bear would have already made their decision. A simple blow from that gigantic paw would be enough to end everything. But that bear hesitated. He remained there, watching. His eyes did not show aggression, nor an immediate predatory instinct. He tilted his head, as if trying to comprehend what was before him. He sniffed once again, feeling the fragility of that little being. He didn't retreat, but he didn't attack either. What was going on in that animal's mind? Time seemed to lengthen. The snow continued to fall softly around them, as the bear slowly lowered itself, bringing its nose closer to the small fallen creature. With extreme delicacy, something rare for such an immense beast, he touched the cub with his snout, pushing it slightly. No reaction. The little wolf remained motionless, his breathing irregular. The bear sniffed his body, smelling the wound and extreme tiredness. Then something unbelievable happened. Instead of following the natural path of the jungle, instead of moving away or eliminating this defenseless being, the bear did something that no one would have ever expected. He took a small step back, as if considering the situation, and with surprising calm lay down next to the cub. His massive body sank slightly into the snow, and he positioned his paws protectively, creating a natural block against the biting wind that was still blowing. The heat emanating from his body was intense, creating a bubble of protection in that icy landscape. It was as if somehow the bear had recognized the cub's fragility and decided that he was neither a threat nor prey. Why did he do this? What could have led a natural predator to demonstrate such unusual behavior? Was it just curiosity? Or perhaps something deeper, something that science still can't explain? Would it be possible for animals to feel compassion even for those who are not their own species? The night passed slowly and the bear remained there. From time to time he looked at the puppy as if waiting for some sign of improvement. The heat from the immense body was beginning to take effect, preventing the little wolf from succumbing to hypothermia. And then, in an almost imperceptible moment, the puppy moved its paw slightly. It was a small, weak movement, but enough for the bear to raise its head, alert. The cub wasn't completely lost. He still had strength, still fought against the slim chances of survival. But would that be enough? The forest, which previously seemed a scene of loneliness and death, now held an unexpected mystery. A protective giant, a fragile puppy, and a dawn that promised answers. But what would happen next? Now I want to hear from you. Do you believe that animals are capable of feeling empathy in this way? That even predators can, in certain situations, act out of compassion? Comment below and tell me what you think. And to prove that you've come this far, write "the bear protected" in the comments. I'll keep an eye out and respond to the best ones. Oh, and don't forget to leave a like. This helps the channel a lot and shows YouTube that more people need to know this unbelievable story. And if you're not yet part of our community, sign up now and activate the bell, because what happens after this moment will leave you speechless. The silence of the forest seemed amplified by the surreal moment that was happening there. The wolf cub was still struggling to regain consciousness, its small tremors barely noticeable beneath the snow. The bear, that giant of nature, remained beside him, watching him with dark, attentive eyes. Everything indicated that this would be a fatal encounter. but something inside that bear prevented him from following his predatory instinct. He sniffed the little wolf again, their noses almost touching. The smell of snow, fear, and exhaustion emanated from the fallen creature's fragile body. Any other bear would have ignored or ended the situation, but this one hesitated, and then, in a gesture that defied all laws of the jungle, he raised his enormous paw and, with a slow, controlled movement, pulled the cub closer. It was too delicate an act for a beast that size. His sharp claws could have hurt the little wolf even more, but instead, he just brought him closer to his massive body. The heat coming from the bear was intense, contrasting drastically with the merciless cold around it. That cub was on the verge of death, and the bear, for reasons that nature may never explain, had decided to protect it. The cub gave a slight spasm, feeling the unusual heat that now enveloped him. Still too weak to understand what was happening, he just let his body give in to the contact. The bear remained motionless, his breathing strong and measured, keeping the cub sheltered by his side. He bowed slightly, and then, with an even more surprising gesture, ran his rough tongue over the little creature. It was almost unbelievable. Bears don't care for wolves. They are natural competitors, predators who live by instincts and the strict rules of the jungle. But there, in the middle of that icy forest, something different was happening. The bear repeated the gesture, cleaning off the snow accumulated on the cub and at the same time, warming it with its hot tongue. Little by little, the puppy began to react. His body, previously stiff from the cold, showed signs of slight relaxation. Small tremors still ran through his skin, but his breathing seemed stronger. He opened his eyes for a brief moment, and all he saw was a huge mass of dark fur surrounding him. At first, instinct told him to fear, to run away. But his weakened condition did not allow for sudden movements, and he soon realized that, despite being so close to an immense predator, there was no threat at that moment. Why was that bear acting like that? What had made this ruthless beast transform into an unlikely guardian? Was the puppy a mere object of curiosity? Or is there something deeper, something that instincts cannot explain? The previous night had been cruel, and any other animal that passed by would only see a cub on the verge of death. But that bear saw something different. He recognized the fragility, felt the vulnerability of that little being, and somehow chose not to ignore it. And now, with the cub safe at his side, he seemed determined to offer protection. The hours passed slowly, and the storm that had previously threatened to cover everything with its fury now slowly dissipated. The snow stopped falling, and the morning sun cast its first rays over the forest, reflecting on the ice crystals like small fragments of glass scattered across the ground. The light illuminated the unlikely scene, a grizzly bear resting calmly, holding a wolf cub warm against him. The puppy was breathing better now. His body absorbed the heat that the bear provided, and little by little his mind woke up to the new reality. He didn't understand what was happening, but he felt that, at least for now, he was safe. His curious eyes opened once more, finding the bear's immense snout just inches away. What would happen next? How long would that bear stay by your side? Had he just given her shelter for one night? Or would this unexpected bond last longer? Now I want to know, what do you think was going on in this bear's mind? Do you believe that animals are capable of feeling empathy for each other, even when they belong to different species? Comment below the sentence, "Nature surprises," if you believe this was a true gesture of compassion. And if this story has already impressed you, leave a like right now. This helps the channel grow and brings more incredible stories like this to you. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe and activate the bell, because the continuation of this story will leave you even more surprised. The cold still dominated the forest, and the calm of dawn was not enough to completely dissipate the remnants of the storm that had hit the region the night before. The wind was still sharp, whistling through the snow-covered trees, raising small white whirlwinds along the way. The sun, still shy, tried to infiltrate the thick clouds, casting a pale light over the frozen scenery. But despite the hostile climate, something unexpected was happening there. The wolf cub, who hours before seemed condemned to the cruel fate of the relentless cold, began to show signs that there was still a chance for him. His breathing, previously labored and weak, now became more regular. His body, warmed by the bear's heat, was slowly regaining some strength. His eyes blinked heavily, and his limbs shook as he tried to make sense of his new reality. The bear, still lying next to him, remained motionless. Its thick fur served as a natural barrier against the freezing wind, protecting the cub from the worst of the cold. But something inside him seemed to be restless. He looked around, sniffed the air, and realized that the storm hadn't completely passed yet. Although the snow had eased, danger still lurked, and, in some inexplicable way, he seemed to know that this little wolf wouldn't survive there much longer without real shelter. Then, without any hesitation, the bear started moving. He stood up slowly, shaking off the excess snow that covered his immense body. His tense muscles indicated that he was about to make a decision. He sniffed the cub once more, as if making sure he still had the strength to continue. And then, suddenly, he started walking. His steps were heavy, sinking into the soft snow with each movement. The sound of giant paws crushing the ground echoed in the silent forest. He didn't look back. He didn't hesitate. He just continued on his way, moving towards the unknown. And it was at that moment that something unbelievable happened. The cub, still weak and trembling, raised its head. His eyes followed the bear's movement, and even though he didn't fully understand what was happening, he felt he needed to react. With a tremendous effort, he tried to rise. His slender paws trembled, slipping lightly on the icy surface, but he didn't give up. Staggering, breathing hard, he took his first step. The thick snow made everything even more difficult. His muscles still hadn't fully recovered, and the pain in his injured paw was a constant reminder of what had happened. But he continued. Every step was a struggle, an almost superhuman effort for someone so small and so fragile. But he moved on. The bear, noticing movement behind him, stopped. He turned his head slightly, as if checking if the cub was really trying to keep up with him. He watched for a moment, expressing nothing but curiosity, and then continued his walk. And the cub, with all the strength that still remained in his body, insisted on following him. The scene was something rarely witnessed in nature. A wolf cub, alone and defenseless, following in the footsteps of a giant bear, as if he were part of his own family. It was a powerful image, a symbol of resilience and unlikely connection between species that would normally never walk together. The minutes passed, and the journey continued. The bear followed a path that only he knew, advancing through the snow-covered forest with firm steps. The puppy, even though weak, forced every muscle in its small body to continue accompanying the one who, in some way, now represented its only hope of survival. The trail they walked was difficult. The snow accumulated in great drifts, and the cold was intense enough to freeze any creature exposed for too long. The cub, despite being protected by the warmth that the bear had provided him earlier, still felt the impact of the temperature. But something inside him pushed him to continue. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was the primal need to follow a bigger, stronger figure. Or maybe somehow he knew that this bear was his only chance. The journey continued, and time seemed to stretch. Every step was a victory. Every meter conquered a test of endurance. The bear continued forward, showing no signs of tiredness. He knew where he was going. And despite his limitations, the puppy was also beginning to understand. They walked together now, an unlikely pair in the icy expanse of the forest. The cub fought against his own limitations, but something inside him made him believe that following that bear was the only option. But where was that giant taking them? What was the destination of this unexpected walk? Was this planned behavior, or just an instinct that led him to act so differently than anyone would expect? Now I want to hear from you. Why do you think the bear made this decision? Did he really know the cub needed help? Comment the word below, basic instinct, if you believe there is more mystery in nature than we can understand. And if this story has already grabbed you, leave a like now. This really helps the channel to grow and continue bringing these exciting stories to you. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe and activate the bell. because what happens after this walk will leave you speechless. The wind howled among the snow-covered trees, and the storm that seemed to have calmed down was still throwing small flakes into the air, making the cold implacable. The sky was gray, heavy with heavy clouds, and the forest continued to exude its dark, deadly beauty. Among the white immensity, an unlikely scene unfolded. A huge brown bear walked with firm steps, leaving deep footprints in the snow, and right behind, a small wolf cub, weak and trembling, struggled to keep up with him. His steps were unsteady, his paws sank with each attempt to move forward, but he refused to stop. He didn't understand why that giant hadn't devoured him or abandoned him to his fate. I just knew I needed to follow him. The journey was far from easy. The cub felt the biting cold pass through its fine fur, making its body shiver involuntarily. Each step felt like a challenge, a gigantic effort for his exhausted legs. He hadn't yet fed, he was still weak, and the pain in his injured paw was a constant reminder of his vulnerability. But despite everything, he continued. Because somehow, he trusted that bear. The bear in turn did not look back but seemed aware of the little survivor's presence. From time to time, he slowed down, as if giving the cub a chance to keep up. His instincts, so well honed by the icy jungle, knew that the storm could return at any moment, that the cold was still a dangerous enemy, and that little wolf wouldn't last much longer if he was left exposed. He needed a shelter, and the bear seemed to know exactly where to find one. After a long walk, the environment began to change. Tall, dense trees gave way to snow-covered rock formations, with large, dark crevices between them. It was a place protected from the wind, where the cold was not so cruel. The bear finally slowed down and stopped in front of a large opening between the rocks. A makeshift cave, hidden among the icy landscape. The panting cub made a final effort to reach the spot, its small paws sinking heavily into the snow, before finally collapsing onto the hard, frozen ground. The bear slowly turned around and watched the cub, who was shaking, his exhausted body struggling to stay awake. The huge animal moved calmly, entered the den, and without hesitation, lay down on the cold floor, its deep breathing echoing softly within the makeshift shelter. The cub, still hesitant, watched him with half-closed eyes, his mind divided between fear and a desperate need for warmth. Then, as if understanding what needed to be done, the bear moved slightly, allowing its huge body to create a barrier against the icy wind that was still blowing outside. The heat emanating from him contrasted with the cold around him, and the little wolf, too exhausted to resist, gave in. He took a tentative step forward, then another, until he finally lay down next to the bear. The contact was scary, but also comforting. The heat coming from the bear was intense, and for the first time since he was lost, the cub felt his body relax. His fine fur, still damp from the melting snow, began to slowly dry. His tremors gradually lessened until he finally stopped shaking. The bear's breathing was steady, and served as a soothing sound in the silence of the cave. The cub, still confused by everything that was happening, allowed himself to close his eyes for a moment. He still didn't understand why that bear had led him there, why he hadn't abandoned him to his fate or treated him like prey. All he knew was that for the first time since he had been separated from his family, he was no longer alone. Time passed slowly inside the cave. Outside, the wind was still howling, and the storm seemed to be gaining strength again. The cub didn't know how much time had passed, but for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like he had to fight for his life every second. He was safe, at least for now. That moment defied all known rules of the jungle. Bears and wolves were not natural allies. They didn't form bonds, they didn't walk together, much less protect each other. But there, in that makeshift shelter among the rocks, something extraordinary had happened. Now I want to hear from you. Why do you think this bear did that? Do you believe that animals are capable of creating unexpected bonds like this? Comment below the sentence, "Nature surprises," if you think this was a true testament to wild empathy. And if this story has already impressed you, leave a like now. This really helps the channel to grow and continue bringing exciting stories like this to you. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe and activate the bell, because the continuation of this story will leave you even more surprised. The silent cave held the warmth of those two unlikely beings that fate had brought together. Outside, the storm had given way to a delicate calm, where only the light wind shook the tops of the snow-covered trees. The flakes that had previously fallen furiously now danced softly in the air, reflecting the cold light of the sun that, even though distant, was beginning to warm the frozen forest. Inside the makeshift shelter, the wolf cub, who had previously been on the verge of death, was breathing better. His body, once so weak and trembling, now moved more naturally. His fur, once soaked with melted snow and hardened by ice, was beginning to regain its softness. The strength that had been drained by the relentless cold was, little by little, returning. The heat of the brown bear, which during those days was its only source of life, had done the impossible. The cub was recovering. The bear remained at his side, watching him from time to time with its deep, calm gaze. His breathing was slow, rhythmic, and even without words, he seemed to understand what was happening. He knew that that cub was no longer the same fragile wolf that he had found lying in the snow. His mission, if it could be called that, was coming to an end. The days had passed strangely in there. The puppy, who before could not even stand, now stood up without so much difficulty. He began to explore small areas around the cave, his heightened senses recognizing the smells and sounds that his mind still retained from his life before the disaster. The snow no longer seemed so threatening, and the cold, although present, no longer consumed him as it used to. But with this recovery also came a new calling. A primal instinct was beginning to rekindle within him, something that could not be explained, only felt. He belonged to the forest. There was something inside him that said his journey wasn't complete yet, that he needed to move on. That morning the snow glistened in the pale sunlight, and the forest seemed to breathe again after so many days of storm. The cub slowly stood up, his muscles still a little stiff but strong enough to support him. He walked to the cave entrance and looked at the white expanse in front of him. That world that once seemed so hostile now became an invitation. He knew he needed to go. Behind him, the bear moved. His huge body slowly rose, as if he felt something was about to happen. The cub turned his head and met those dark eyes that had so often watched him in silence. For a long moment, the two just stared at each other. There were no words, no grand gestures, just an inexplicable connection between two beings who had shared something that defied all laws of nature. The cub took a step back, as if hesitating. Didn't he want to go? Or did you just not know how to say goodbye? He would never fully understand what had happened there, but something inside him recognized that this bear had been more than a protector. He had been the bridge between life and death. With one last look, the little wolf raised its head to the sky and let out a howl. It was not a desperate call like before, nor a wail of pain. It was a strong, pure sound that echoed through the silent forest. Maybe it was a farewell. Maybe it was a thank you. The bear remained there, motionless, listening to the sound disappear among the trees. He didn't react. He didn't try to stop the puppy from leaving. He just watched as that little survivor turned around and started walking. His steps were steady now. With every meter he walked, he became less fragile and more part of the world he belonged to. The cub didn't look back. His destiny was in front of him, hidden in the shadows of the dense forest, where he needed to find his way again. The bear watched him until his small silhouette disappeared into the trees, becoming just another wild spirit wandering the unknown. But would that puppy ever remember this encounter? Do animals remember those who helped them, even when they belong to different species? Now I want to hear from you. What do you think happened after that goodbye? Did the little wolf find his pack again? Or was his story just beginning? Comment the word below survivor if you believe he went his way stronger than ever. And if this story moved you, leave a like right now. This really helps the channel to continue bringing incredible stories like this. And if you are not yet part of our community, sign up and activate the bell, because the continuation of this journey may be closer than we imagine. The cold wind continued to course through the forest, whistling through the snow-covered branches and raising small white clouds that danced through the air. The sun was already higher in the pale sky, but its heat did little to warm the frozen landscape. The soft snow held the footprints of the little wolf, now disappeared among the trees, following a destiny that no one could predict. The bear stood still at the cave entrance for a long time, its dark eyes fixed on the white horizon. He didn't move, he didn't growl, he didn't show any sign of impatience or restlessness. He just watched. The silence around him was absolute, as if the world itself had stopped to witness that moment. What was he thinking? Do animals think like us? Did he understand what had just happened? Or was it all just a random event, guided by primitive instincts and invisible laws of nature? The bear's behavior defied everything we know about wildlife. Predators don't help prey. Animals do not show compassion to those who do not belong to their species. At least that's what science said. But then why did he do it? Why, instead of ignoring that puppy on the verge of death, did he welcome him? Why did you decide to share his warmth, protect him from the storm, offer him shelter, and allow him to recover? Was it just an inexplicable instinct? A distant memory of a lost cub he himself never had the chance to protect? Or is there something in nature that we still don't fully understand? Many believe that animals are guided only by survival, by immutable rules that make them hunt, flee, and fight for their lives. But stories like this make us question everything. There are reports of dogs that refuse to abandon their owners, even in situations of extreme danger. There are stories of elephants that cry when they lose a companion, of dolphins that save humans from drowning, of lions that raise cubs of other species. Does compassion exist in the wild in ways we cannot yet understand? What if nature was more than just survival? What if there was something deeper, an invisible connection that unites all living creatures, regardless of their species? The bear was still there, motionless, staring into space. His eyes seemed to search for something, perhaps a distant shadow among the trees, perhaps a sign that the little wolf was safe. But he knew he would never get that answer. The only thing that remained was the silence of the forest and the lonely footprints in the snow, witnesses of an encounter that no one would ever fully understand. Now I want to hear from you. Why do you think this bear did what he did? Was it instinct? Was it compassion? Or is there something in nature that we still cannot explain? Comment the word below mystery if you believe that nature still holds secrets that are beyond our understanding. And if this story made you reflect, leave a like. This really helps the channel to continue bringing these exciting stories to you. And if you're not yet part of our community, sign up now and activate the bell, because who knows what the next unbelievable story nature has to show us will be. The cold wind was still blowing gently through the forest, carrying with it small particles of snow that glistened in the pale sunlight. The bear remained standing at the cave entrance for long minutes, watching the little wolf's trail of footprints disappear between the trees. His gaze seemed distant, as if he was trying to understand what had happened there. That encounter, so unlikely and mysterious, had left a mark not only on the snow, but perhaps on something deeper, something that science still cannot explain. But what if I told you that this wasn't the only time a bear saved another animal? Stories like this have happened before, challenging everything we know about wild behavior. And some of them are even more surprising than this. Have you ever imagined a bear protecting a human in the middle of the forest? Well, that happened. In 2012, a hunter in the United States became lost in a remote region and spent 3 days without food or shelter. He was weak, without the strength to continue, and when he thought his life would come to an end, something unbelievable happened. A black bear appeared, but instead of attacking him, the bear lay down next to him, sharing his body heat during the night and ensuring he survived the extreme cold. On the third day, the man was rescued, and the bear, as if knowing his mission was over, disappeared into the forest. What if I told you that bears have even helped cubs of other species? A case recorded in Canada left biologists completely perplexed. A newborn deer calf, separated from its mother, was found alongside a grizzly bear and her own cubs. The bear not only allowed him to be close, but cared for him as if he were one of her own babies. The scene was recorded by researchers who accompanied the bear, and no one could understand why she did this. These cases challenge everything we know about the animal kingdom. Science teaches us that bears are opportunistic predators, solitary creatures that rarely demonstrate behaviors like these. But then why do we see these stories happening? Is there something more to nature than just instinct? Can compassion, a sense of protection, and even emotional bonding exist between different species? If these stories made you curious, and you want to see more unbelievable moments like these, subscribe to the channel right now. Here we tell real stories of survival, rescues, and human-animal connections that defy all logic. Each new video brings an exciting story that proves that the wild world is full of mysteries that we are still far from understanding. And for those of you who have followed this story so far, I want to know your opinion. Do you believe that animals can have feelings such as compassion and empathy, even between different species? Or do you think this is all just a protective instinct that we still can't understand? Comment the word below, wild mystery, if you believe that nature has much more to teach us. And don't forget, leave your like right now so that more people can learn about these incredible stories, and activate the bell so you don't miss any of the next stories we have to tell. Because believe me, this was just one of many.